It all began on a rainy evening in New York City. The kind of evening where people rushed with umbrellas, taxis honked impatiently, and neon signs reflected in puddles scattered across the cracked sidewalks. Inside a modest little diner tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, life carried on as usual. The place wasn't fancy. Chipped red leather booths, the smell of fries lingering in the air, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in years. But it had a kind of warmth, a heartbeat of its own. And that's where our story unfolds. Man walked in, dressed in an oversized hoodie, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled so low it nearly hit his face. To the other customers, he was just another tired soul escaping the rain. But beneath that disguise was someone the world knew well, Alexander Ward, one of the richest men in America. Alexander had everything most people could dream of. Billion-dollar companies, sprawling mansions, private jets, and an endless supply of luxury. Yet, he felt emptier than ever. His life was a constant cycle of meetings, investments, and people pretending to like him for his money. He came to the diner seeking something he hadn't felt in a long time: normalcy. Behind the counter was a young man named Ethan Carter. At 24, Ethan worked double shifts as a waiter, juggling college tuition debt and trying to support his younger sister after their parents had passed away. Despite the exhaustion written on his face, he always greeted customers with genuine warmth. When Alexander slid into a booth, Ethan approached with his usual cheerful tone. "Evening. Cold night, huh? What can I get you?" Alexander mumbled, trying to keep his voice low. "Just a burger, fries, and coffee." Simple and solid. "Got it," Ethan said with a nod. Alexander noticed something about Ethan. There was no pretense in his eyes. No recognition of who he might be. Just kindness. And that struck him harder than he expected. A subtle connection. As Ethan served the food, Alexander watched him. The way he smiled at the elderly couple at the corner table. How he joked with the cook to lighten the mood. How he refilled coffee cups without being asked. It reminded Alexander of a world he'd long forgotten. A world where people weren't blinded by wealth or status, where kindness was currency. When Ethan returned to check on him, Alexander asked quietly, "Do you ever, feel stuck?" Ethan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "Like life keeps pushing you down, no matter how hard you try." Ethan gave a soft chuckle, though his eyes betrayed something deeper. "All the time. But I keep moving, because my little sister counts on me. She's in high school, dreams of being a doctor someday. I can't quit, you know? Even when I want to." Something stirred inside Alexander. For years he had met businessmen, politicians, and celebrities. But here, in this rundown diner, a young waiter reminded him of the resilience he'd lost in himself. When Alexander finished his meal, he reached for his wallet. But before he could place the bill on the table, Ethan slipped him a folded piece of paper with the check. "Have a good night, sir," Ethan said softly, before walking away to another table. Alexander frowned, unfolding the note. Inside were just a few words, written in hurried handwriting. "No matter what you're going through, you matter. Don't forget that." Alexander froze. Nobody had spoken to him like that in years. Not his executives, not his so-called friends, not even the people closest to him. Everyone saw the billionaire, not the man. Yet this stranger, this waiter, somehow saw through his disguise. He left a $500 tip on the table and quietly walked out, but the note stayed crumpled in his fist like a lifeline. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. The words replayed in his mind over and over again. He thought about Ethan's tired smile, his mention of his sister, his unshakable determination. The next evening, Alexander returned to the diner, this time without the hoodie, without the disguise. He walked in wearing a crisp suit. Conversations, In the diner hushed. People recognized him instantly, but Ethan just blinked in surprise. You're Alexander Ward. Alexander smiled faintly. Yes, and you're the man who gave me the best meal I've had in years. Ethan flushed, unsure of what to say. Over coffee, Alexander asked Ethan about his life, about his sister, about his dreams. Ethan hesitated at first, but soon opened up. He spoke about working endless hours to pay rent, how his sister sometimes skipped meals so he could eat, how the weight of responsibility nearly crushed him, but he never gave up. Alexander listened intently. For the first time in years, he felt human. Finally, Alexander leaned forward. What if I told you, I want to help you? No strings attached. Not charity, but a chance. Ethan frowned. Why me? Because when I walked in here last night, you didn't see a billionaire. You saw a man. And you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That life isn't about what we own, but who we lift up. In the weeks that followed, Alexander kept his promise. He paid for Ethan's sister's schooling, covered their rent, and gave Ethan a chance to work in one of his companies. Not as a favor, but as someone he believed in. Ethan worked harder than ever, and soon, his determination turned into success. His sister went to medical school, and their lives began to shift from survival to stability. But perhaps the most profound change happened to Alexander himself. He began visiting the diner regularly, not to escape, but to stay grounded. He reconnected with humanity, learned to laugh again, and slowly rebuilt relationships that weren't based on wealth. Years later, Alexander would say in an interview, "Of all the boardrooms I've sat in, of all the luxury I've owned, the greatest lesson I ever learned came from a tired young waiter in a rundown diner. He taught me that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. And sometimes, it saves two."